This is IBM Museum, and this is a long-awaited video. I am at 1,000 subscribers. That is just fantastic. And in preparation for reaching that milestone, I plan to go through and review the executive workstation that Computer Reset in Dallas, Texas was so kind when I visited a couple weeks ago that they brought out and they had one set aside for me. And there were others that received those as well. I think with the original 8-bit guy video, it was shown to where there was like 5 within there. And I don't even know which one I got that was in there. I've not opened the box. I have the box off to the side. And I don't typically preface my videos with a bunch of information. But I'm going to go through some preparation or show some of the preparation that I did for this video, for going through and unboxing, bringing the unit out. And a large part of that was actually going through and watching on video and being certain what was there to the unit, that I didn't even need to look in the box beforehand to know what I need. So let me get turned around and I'll go through and switch off the internal webcam. I had to go around the box here, wheeling around the box here. But I went through, and just to make sure I have all my bases covered, I have this Model 30 that's off here to the side. And this doesn't have a hard drive on it. The 720 KB diskette drive, I went through and tried to get it to work. I've got a box of these that about half of them work and half of them don't. But I think I've got it tucked deep inside my storage. And so what I'm going to do is, if I have to work with the diskette drive to the executive workstation, I'll go through and just use the 1.44 megabyte unit that I have here. I know that this goes through and is verified to work. Now, with the idea that the 720 KB drive may in fact work on the executive workstation, I do have 2 boot diskettes I've made up, and by verifying on the small 30, it goes through, and with the 1.44 megabyte drive, goes through and loads these. And these are actually, I think, like DOS 6.22 or something else, way up in there. Of course, later on, from what the machine came with, even the MUL 30, when it came out in 1987, was released with. But I wanted to go through and verify that I did have working boot diskettes. I am aware on the executive workstation that does not have a hard drive that's on the system, and so this is the resources I would like to work with, and to, not just boot to ROM basic if that were the thing, but being able to go through and boot to DOS. And I do even have the Microsoft Diagnostic utility that's on these diskettes, and 2 copies. I went through and verified that both of these are able to boot. And thanks to the original video as well, I know that I needed a right angle power plug. I was digging around at the last minute. I had a box of these down below stored away, and I even have a few more that I grabbed because I was aware that has that angled plug that fits up underneath in the executive workstation. So I'm prepared with this power cord to work with that. Now, there, in the chance that the onboard video doesn't work, I do have where I can even go through and capture video on the screen. Have that all set up that I could go through and switch over. And of course, if the if something like the power supply doesn't work for the unit, I've got the Mul 30 here that I can go through and pause the video. I can pull out the power supply. And of course, with that scheme as well, I would not have the onboard monitor would not be able to receive power. It does get fed power through the a connection on the power supply. And a little bit famously, I'm going to move forward with this. I'm going to have a great video with I've gone through the extra steps to make sure of what I've got set up that I can kind of react to whatever this thing throws at me. I have extra SIMs on that motherboard or planar in the Mul 30 here. It's the exact same type of system planar actually. I'll go through and I can show that on video. I'll bend around here and pop that up on the screen. So there's a picture of what's called the P planar. And I knew from that original video that this is the planar that's in the system. In fact, I even think that this may even have older BIOS. So we'll go through and check out the BIOS version. From what I saw in that original video, it looked to be a standard Mul 30 BIOS, and I've got even images of that stuff online. But I could go through and I could even do a planar swap in there. That planar was totally gone. I have a CPU that's on this system that I could swap over if that's the case. But I'm just trying to be, ready to go for whatever may come up with this. Now I do have I did see from the previous video that it's got uses the same riser as the Mul 30, and so I grabbed a couple of those. And I want to point out something too that's kind of really fundamental with the Mul 25 and Mul 30. And I think the executive workstation is effectively a prototype for the Mul 25. That all-in-one unit with the screen, just like the executive workstation shows. And the Mul 30 actually came first. And before they had the Mul 25 at all. And it goes through and it has the same chipset and everything else to the Mul 30 that's on the Mul 25. And so that's what I think IBM was doing, especially if this thing was right around that 87 time frame when, or even 86 when they started working on the PS2s. And it may have just been a kind of a proof of concept that they could do it. Now, the executive workstation, it actually masked out, as I saw in that previous video, that the upper slot. Maybe it doesn't have room for that adapter or a bracket behind that. Now the battery that's on this is only for running the real-time clock on the Mul 30. The Mul 25, that 8086 base version that was built after the Mul 30, is identical otherwise, but it doesn't have a real-time clock chip in it. There's not any configuration that's held on the Mul 30 or the Mul 25 planars. Not any non-volatile RAM, effectively CMOS SANs or anything like that. The only reason that battery's there is for the real-time clock. It's even different from the Motorola chip that was on the IBM AT. It's different from the DAOS modules that were on the later 3286 and 25286. The Mul 25 and Mul 30 are very unique in that they don't have any switches to do settings on the system planar. They don't have any non-volatile RAM like the later systems. they go through and they configure themselves, auto-configure themselves for the equipment that's detected on every boot. On every cold boot, it goes through and figures out the diskette drive capacity and other areas to that. So the one thing nice is you can even swap in these as long as you have the proper drive. And this is a Sony drive ultimately that was on a lot of the, like the Mul 60s and initial Mul 80s. And it's a big button drive. It is 1.44. The 720 KB drive has no marking on the front of the button. That's how you know the difference. Even though the button size and everything else, the appearance can be very similar. But these are drop-in replacements ultimately for the 720 KB drives on the Mul 30. Same pinout, everything else. You swap the drives, you go to boot it up, and it recognizes these right off the bat and goes through and functions with them. And, you know, I'd like to have had some 720 KB drives around that worked that I could go through if that was the case. But, you know, that's what we've gone for. Now, with the riser on the board, if, you know, I go through and have power supply issues, as I say, that takes out that built-in monitor effectively, but I do have the ability to go through and capture video. I do have a CRT screen off to the side here that I can set up if I have to. I went through and verified with the Mul 30 that the MCGA video that is on this level of system is able to work with my video capture. I went through, I do have a VGA board from IBM that if I can't get the onboard video or it has that cold boot issue, I can easily go through and I can swap in that VGA board to the base of the unit. I'll have to see how I can go through, and I didn't study the video a whole bunch, but I hope it's kind of intuitive of how I can get that screen off the top of it, as 8-Bit Guy went through and did. I don't anticipate going through and working on power supplies if they don't work. I just would go through and just do a swap of the power supply here, but I do have a toolkit with the security bits in them and able to open up the power supply or whatever screws I'd encounter inside. I should have all the variations of those security bits. Now, the one thing that's very critical for this aspect of testing the PS2s, you know, the PS2s introduced that bidirectional parallel port, and I've shown this on video before, these parallel postcode readers. And so that tells you even if the planer works at all, the CPU on that is going through even before you have video that shows on the screen. So I brought one of these out. I have others as spares. And I went through, normally you can use the USB power, but I've gone through and, you know, we're not going to go through and use the mouse. I don't have a mouse driver even on the boot diskette that I can go through and plug in this adapter into that PS2 port just to get power for this so we have a display. So I think we are all set. And I've got the box off to the side. I'll have to determine with the height of things. I'll probably can bring the box up, but then set it down in front just to go through and pull the unit out and set it up on the table. So let me go through and plan for that. Tuck my chair off away. And there's even IBM markings. In fact, I'll go through the box beforehand, and it is a heavy, kind of bulky box. You can see that there's There is an FRU there. I don't know if to read that as a 49F6161. I don't know what the penciled writing is. Let's hear. There is a an address for computer reset on one of the sides. Okay. Make it so. I must have kicked one of the legs to that. And I think that's about the right alignment of the camcorder. We have the keep dry. This is, in fact, for my farsightedness. Okay, so that's a tag. It says 7496-037. And there is that 49F6161. The serial number is 27. So 27 is the plant that was made in. In fact, I can do that. Okay, there's a good view of the serial number 27-011397. It's got an EC level, that E489001. So that's a little bit of information on this unit in particular. And as far as I know, this is the original box of this unit. And I have, you know, at Computer Reset, we lifted a flap like that to look inside, and they pulled out the Model M keyboard for me, and that's all they did. So there's the Computer Reset. It has an address. Of course, it's upside down. I'm not going to juggle the box enough. People can just read. Okay, so I guess it actually goes to the IBM Corporation and lists the address there. I can probably do photos of that and get that online. My ring light, of course, is giving a little bit of reflection. But that's interesting. It was delivered to IBM, and much of the thought like someone else was doing a proof of concept. And there's the same sort of label as we saw on the other side. And that 6161 being that part of that FRU. Oh, here is probably the Computer Reset. So, it even has Richard's name on there. And so this looks like to the point where, you know, it was done maybe for IBM, sent to IBM by that one mailing label, and then redirected later on. It probably they just set in the warehouse, the 5 systems or whatever that Computer Reset had, and then sent on to Computer Reset when somebody went through and discovered them and said, hey, we never went through and did anything with this system, so let's just sell it off. Or these systems, the 5 systems. So let me go through. I'm going to set this on the box in front of the bench, and we can go through the and it's packing. I'll bring the packing up, and kind of one of the first kind of worrisome angles for me here is it's got the straight on power cord here. And so this is maybe not original for the system. Then there's tape, and I'm aware from that original video that the one unit was locked and it had keys taped to the packaging is what was said on video. So, and that's Funny, I wonder if that's even like a magnet. It's there like a disc. But that's just nestled. You can see kind of the profile of the machine there. And I heard something fall. Oh, so separate keys. One key off of the ring and the other one on. I'll set those aside. And I'll set this aside first. Here is what they pulled out at computer for the, okay, so, and this has been cut open because they did show me the inside of here. They said, hey, here's a Model M. And so, yeah, and this is brand new shape. And I can smell even the newness to the styrofoam. And this is even the one that has the SDL connection. It's got the cable on the styrofoam. I'll show that in a moment. But there's the bottom of that. And, you know, these units sell for pretty good. Of course, up to $200, you know, I've seen easily for those. And then the SDL cable, it's got the styrofoam like we saw in that original video. It's a little bit encrusted there. But I don't see any of the kind of pulling it out like the styrofoam like I saw in that original video either. It was just in the bottom of this case. And that tape was cut on one side. And of course the Model M would be from IBM. And so this is that visible in that profile side. And I smell just the newness of things. And then in the bottom of the box is just that foam. Otherwise, there's not really anything. I was hoping for, I know that 8-Bit Guy did get a manual to one of the units. And that would be fantastic if that, if one of those manuals is still around, because I'll go through and I'll scan the manual. This foam otherwise looks like it is, there's nothing else other than foam packaging in here. Now on the underside of this have areas that look like a manual sized on the bottom of the foam, but there is nothing else to that foam otherwise. And then this spacer, kind of spacer block in there for what was on the bottom of that. And I will go through okay. want to drop that on the floor or anything, but I want to get the box out of the way. I don't need the I don't need that straight through cable, the power cord either. I've got that angled. Okay, let's put that back to the side. The SDL cable for the keyboard on top of it, and let's go through and have a look at the end. And this is actually smaller. We can actually put it in the same profile as it was for the original video. And I'll go through, I'm gonna, since everything's cleared at my feet, I'm gonna go through and sit back down. Very small screen. And one of the units had, just like the original video, one of the units had more of a PS2 styling looking screen. And the front diskette is locked. The door for the diskette. And we'll have to see when we open this. In fact, what the heck, let's go through. We've got the two keys, because I want to see whether it has that cardboard insert, and then I kind of know a little bit more that it was maybe an untouched unit. So that does have that cardboard insert, good positive feel to that. And I'm hoping that that diskette drive will go through and work. We'll test that in a moment. Hoping that the monitor will work. We have the power button, and it says picture, but it's probably an intensity. And for this size, I'm expecting a monochrome monitor. Then it's got the back compartment and has space underneath for the cables to go in from underneath. But then you can see, and even that power supply, it's very evident. I didn't see as much on the original video of how that's even angled for the power supply sitting on, ultimately of course, for the size of this unit, the planer is below it. This power supply looks very, very small. And even for the Model 30, the power supply was 90 watts. And I think the Model 25, I think it's even lower than that. But then I see the video cable here. Even for the string relief, there is a little bit of where it's come out just with this odd contortion to go up and above to where it gets into the system. And of course, two riser slots visible, and that was typical for the Model 25. You had ability to put in two adapters, and that third adapter, it looks like it's a little bit too high. In that original video, I was just seeing that as marked off for not being available for use. Now, I want to go through, and I actually want to go through and power this unit on, because on the original video, I mean, we saw enough of the insides, and there'll be a time where I'll go through and I will get inside this unit and document and take quite a bit more pictures to things. But I wanted to go through and get this unit all connected up and powered on to see what we can get from it, see if we can get it to boot. And So I meant to, and I have it off somewhere, and I didn't think this out enough to the point that especially with this door here, to where the parallel port postcode reader would be pretty tied in there. And you can see the Mul 30, how staggered those back connectors are. This is the parallel port here, of course, and the serial port on that 25 pin. And then, you know, the MCGA video from below. And it looks like it can have that door open and to go through, and for the power to that mouse connection that's just right there. And I know I have this orientation right. It's just a little bit tight. May even be the first time the pins for something like a mouse went inside, depending. I should have got this power cord in here first. I just didn't realize how tiny these were. And I don't know when the angled power cables came into things, where I thought that was kind of like later, these C13 power plugs, but it looks like there's, you know, that's where it fits, and that's probably, that might be one of the first uses of those angled C13 power plugs, as sometimes was some units use those later on. And I've seen tight recesses that the power plugs have used before. Okay, get that keyboard, and we'll just go through straight on. Since we have that, we'll leave that back access door open for that postcode reader. And that being a little bit tight too. And flat side up on these. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through. Ooh. So that door. And so that works real good. Being careful on this plastic. This old. Does that come out? The one side really released easy. Nothing broken. I'm already getting hair on it. But that goes through now, at least, that I don't have that door in the way. This sits in a real good position otherwise for my inputs, because I want to have this. I still smell the newness to this. Set that in the back. And I want to make sure that we are off, because I want to show this angle. I'm really interested in if this has the cold boot issue, especially with that small power supply. In my observation, that cold boot, and I did a previous video on it for the MUL 30, but was more readily apparent a lot of the time when you had, okay, that's plugged in, when there was a more heavy power draw than from the devices. And that's probably there's noise from this keyboard, and that's probably the plastic pieces that sometimes these have to be rebolted. That those, yeah, it sounds like a bunch of plastic pieces in there. Although it does seem like the plate is held in pretty good. And of course, just one power cord, because I wanted to have the postcode reader visible first. And I can go through and spin this around and open up the door. In fact, let's get the... And if I have to do something like swapping the diskette, I'm going to have to get into the base unit anyway. Okay. And that's not cardboard, that's actually plastic. And there's the marking on it. Yeah, that's plastic. I thought that was like a cardboardy sort of thing. And we'll even pop in, I'll pop in one of the diskettes. And then for the video, you know, I can rotate this around. But I want to have where I can show the postcodes right off the bat. Okay, so we have 00 and then FF. And it's not even tumbling over. Just 00FF. And there's a high. There's a high raster. And I don't know if this one was shown in that video with, there's one that was just, the screen was just very high raster. But I'm not seeing that pair. Okay, there we get it. So powering off, and now it's turning over. And that brings up the and it's showing 0607 right now in the 4-segment reader. And I'm smelling the newness to this thing. It's interesting that power the first time, and it stopped at 06 is the code that looks like it shows there. And I'm not sure, I mean, that didn't matter for battery, but it might matter for, and so there's just a raster scan. I'll show that around in a moment here. I'm going to do a warm boot, just a Control-Delete on the keyboard. And so normally this has to be in a condition that where it can reboot. I'm not seeing the codes change at all, like the warm boot has had no, the sequence on the keyboard has had no effect. Power down. So it is going through and cycling in the codes now. It goes through the 02, 03, up to the 06, and that is where it stops. Yep, on that 4-segment display, I believe the 07 is the next code. And then 06 being the one that it's effectively stopping at. And so that's deeper. And 0607 on the other PS2s is the CMOS, that non-volatile RAM that the basically the module is missing, is what that normally means. And this, the real-time clock, should not matter. Just to that battery. And I wanted to show the front of it to okay, so power light's on. And it's at 0607. And see, there's raster on the display. But this is not, I mean, for the codes to turn over, that CPU is working fine. Probably the BIOS would be working fine. There may be some bit rot or something else in there that would cause it to halt. It's not getting up to the point where any video or any boot sequence to this on this unit. Always stopping at that 0607 now. But so otherwise, if we didn't have that parallel port postcode reader, we wouldn't know if this machine was alive. It just gives us a nice little status that we're able to go through and boot to this. So what I'm going to go through and do, and I could go through and check kind of to see when it does the memory count. If I even wanted to go through and plug that mul 30 back in just to see the same relative place in the code where this is actually halting, just to know what's going on. And of course, it clearly looks like it's before the video initialization, and it may have something to do with that. I went through, let's go through and eject the diskette. I'll go through and pull the key out. I'm of course going to go through and disconnect power. And to go through and to pull this apart, and I will go through and pause the video and be back. In fact, I got to see how much time we've gone through so far. It looks like 45 minutes so far, and just even what we've done. So I'm going to go through and pause the video and try and get this a little bit disassembled, and just to look at what might be going on the inside here. So I did take things apart. In fact, all the screws to take this bottom tray out are slotted screws, and they are tight, extremely tight. I had to pull out a screwdriver I could get a little bit more torque on to just get them undone. So this unit, I don't believe has been investigated at all. And I went through, and even to the point where I plugged in my video capture in the back just to make sure I wasn't getting any video output that I could capture anything else. And this is even apparently before the video initialization. I went through thinking that if it was the MCGA video initialization, that I would go through and pop in the VGA adapter in there, and I put it in the top slot, and there was no difference at all. It still stops at that 06 postcode, and I haven't gone through and pulled the riser or anything else. That's just for the real-time clock chip. There shouldn't be anything. I've gone through. I did temporarily pull the cabling from the diskette drive. That didn't do anything. It's even before the diskette drive initializes as well. Now I did go through and I identified that the BIOS on here is the same. In fact, it's the same as the MUL 30 that I have sitting over the side, since all the same planar and everything else. It's actually revision 2. And it is, so I have the list of the BIOS versions, all the known images I found, and have gone through to where the image that's here is the 60X8939 and 618940. And those are the, click on that version's text, and it is the revision 2 that's listed there. The revision 3 was not released. I haven't found wild, and then the latest version of this BIOS is marked as revision 4, and that revision 4 even goes through and it adds the capability of a real rare 45 megabyte proprietary drive, of course, that this system does not have, but it puts in the recognition for that. So that's really where, where this is at this point. That I'm not going to go through and do a complete video where I think the next step that I'm going to do, and the BIOS revision will give an indication. I mean, I could, if I had that BIOS all mapped out and everything else, I could even see what code that's halting at for that. But, maybe somebody can weigh in comments on, like Major Tom or something like that, that has examined that BIOS a little bit deeper to tell where it's stopping. I think for the working system that I'm looking for, and this is, since that planar is underneath all this power supply and diskette drive assembly, it's on a platform. Now I see some screws here. I'll have to look in the back to see if there's anything. And of course, to this point, I'll have to go through and detach the monitor display just to get it out. But I think it's really to this point where I'll go through and I'll swap in the planar for the MUL 30 that I have off to the side. just to have a system I know that goes through and powers up and works correctly. And in the meantime, to go through and we'll configure that what that code is it's stopping at in the BIOS checkpoint. But I want to once again bring up that importance of the parallel port postcode reader, because not seeing any other reaction. I mean, fans turn on, you get raster scan, anything else, but this machine is halting at something. I mean, there's no visible signs otherwise that it is going through and processing anything. And I could go through and I could even swap RAM or something like that as a really quick, swap the BIOS versions, because it's got the chips that are right out here. That would be in the case of like bit rot or something else, but I don't think that is the case. And but it'd be a real easy swap for me to do ahead of swapping out the whole entire planar. Now, as I talked about, the MUL25 and MUL30 going through and configuring themselves, auto-configuring on each startup, there's a particular register that's in here that, and it's not backed by the battery at all. It's just, it goes through when it does the equipment detection, it goes through and it plugs in the various things like whether the diskette controller is enabled or disabled, whether the video is enabled or disabled. And what effect that has is, if you have an external video in there, the video like this VGA adapter, it goes through and it knows to disable the planar MCGA through that register. And it's even possible to go through, and that's at hex 60, I think, as I remember. And I've done a little bit of, that's listed in the tech ref, but I went through and I found that information in the tech ref and went through and posted out. It goes through for the serial port enabled, for the parallel port enabled. It's all bit values within that register on this. And so this is identical to the MUL30 planar. It's a MUL30 planar. It's in there, MUL30 BIOS. And it may have problems with that register, and that may be the parallels, because 06, 07, that level on the other PS2s from the 286 level on up, that typically means that CMOS clock or the configuration in there is not, the module's missing, like on the MUL30 286, that if that Dallas clock module is removed off the system, it halts at 06. So there may be an identical kind of or parallel setting that it can't understand the configuration and can't set that register in some way. And that's going to be on the planar. It's probably where there's something on this planar that goes through. And this is the early MUL planar of the MUL30. It's called the P planar. And there's a later version that was called the Greenwich planar for where it was made. And that was just a nickname that the enthusiast, such as myself, came up. That planar was made in Greenwich, Scotland, and there at the IBM plant. And so that planar got named that way. That is, it changes the layout a little bit. And it also changes one of the MCGA gate array chips. They had problems, and they released an engineering change announcement for the MUL25s, basically replacing the Type 1 planar with the Type 2 planar is the way to go through and avoid the issue, because that changed that one chip. But they didn't give an engineering change announcement for the same level of the MUL30 planar. Even though it was all the same chipset, that P planar has that earlier MCGA gate array chip on it. And that's engineering change announcement 2.3. I can probably link or something else in the work I do with the system, just to give a little bit of background. But there's never the engineering change announcement given for the Mul 30, just the Mul 25. And although the Greenwich planar has the later MCGA gate array chip, just like the Type 2 planar does with the Mul 25. So it may be something related to that in that video initialization aspect, possibly. That still may be weighing in, even though I tried out an external video. And I can go through and with the other Mul 25, and I'll go through and do a little bit more test and see where that's halting at with that system, to kind of understand a little bit more further on this and be able to troubleshoot more. But I think it's probably going to come down to replacing this planar just outright. And this has a, it's not really visible on the camcorder, but this has a brownish colorization, and most of the time, it's not a real true indication, but a lot of the early planars from IBM for a particular model were in brown, and then the later versions were in green as they got into more of the PCB, the printed circuit board production. Oftentimes the green colorization was the mainstream. And this is a brown colorization to this. Even though there's the same planar in this Mul 30, the planar in here is the green colorization. Another aspect to check, an MCGA video, just like VJ, is analog. And it has a ceramic with a gold cap, and that's not very visible on video as well. Ramdac chip that is ceramic on the earlier versions, and then later on in release, when IBM released the Mul later on, they typically replace those ceramic Ramdacs with plastic Ramdacs. And that Ramdac is just what converts the digital signal that the computer comes up with for video to analog for the purpose of the monitor. So it's very close to where that video output is. So that's really what sets in store. And I mean, for probably what will be an hour-long video, yes, it looks like it's going to be an hour-long video. We didn't get anything working, but we determined a little bit more. And this doesn't necessarily exonerate any bad troubleshooting procedures or anything else like that. But it kind of shows that going through and pulling this unit out of the box and plugging it in, it stopped. It didn't have any indication that the motherboard is alive if you don't have one of those parallel port postcode readers. So that is very helpful in this instance. And I wonder if just the other models that like this, I mean, we saw some similar issues on some of the other ones that were pulled out of the box. There was one that displayed video that was really skewed, and that's how I would have reacted to have that external video board that I could have plugged in. But that, it does kind of explain some things of just pulling these out of the box, expecting to work. Looks like that's not going to be the case here. I'm going to have to go through, and of course I do have spare Model 30 planars as well. In fact, rather than pulling it out of the unit, I'll probably even get one of those and verify it works and get it in the unit. And if I have, I think I've got even some that are the brown colorization. The one image that I did show earlier is a green colorization to it. But that's the same thing that we're looking at. And even in this image, when I went through and zoomed in, I'm able to see that it's the same BIOS version and everything on this otherwise. This one also has that Ramdac. If you look in the upper right-hand corner next to the solder pads for the feature connector, the double rows, you see that ceramic ram deck with the gold cap on top of it. So this planer that I even have pictured here, be it wherever I came up with which planer I picked out when I photographed it, is identical to what is in this unit. And I'll go through and I'll put one of those planers in to have a working executive workstation. And I'll have to see. I'm not, don't ask me. I'm not aware of who else may have got, maybe Epitronic, by the video that he produced, might have one. I don't know. I don't know who was going through and was able to get them. It'd be interesting if they go through and test those units, and I would hope that they would get the parallel port postcode reader and kind of see if they give similar indications for their unit. But it'd be interesting to see what the other units do as well. And I don't know where those other units are. I don't know what's left at Computer Reset now. But if the same fault is discovered, these Model 30 planers might be a little bit of a commodity, and it's going to be probably a little bit of research on the BIOS to go through and find out what code it's halting at. What's the hardware failure on this planer that's causing to halt at that step every time, and whether those things can be repaired, if that was just an issue for what was here. And as I say, with that cold boot issue to the Mol 30 and Mol 25 that's been observed, and typically that's higher power draw on the planer when it has accessories, especially like a math core processor and things like that have a higher current draw. That's where that cold boot issue manifests itself, and you don't get video. I haven't had the parallel port postcode reader on a system like that to see if that's that code, that something that stops at that level. But that MCGA chipset, there's 2 chips to that, some associated video RAM and as well, that had some issues that IBM was aware of, and that could be the case. It's impacting things here. But it just goes to show, I mean, it looks, you flip the switch and you don't get video out. There's no indication otherwise that the system is working, although we do see that postcode turnover now. So that kind of explains somebody going through. I'm not mentioning names. I'm not wanting to bring any sort of history into this or anything that mistakes are made. But someone going through and having a little bit of time being thrown off initially, the power plug that's angled to get it to fit and things like that, and then going through and flipping the switch and not getting any reaction, visible reaction to show that unit's working, kind of threw things from there. That's when it's just, why isn't this working? And that happens to me. That happens on video even, to where I've gone through and, I've flipped the power switch and got that spark, got a power supply, blew out, whatever else. That happened to me on an NCR system, that happened on my industrial system. And that throws me, for especially the case of the industrial system. You think, that's the only one I have. And I'm not going to go through and swap the power supply of my higher end unit, my Gearbox 800, in there to maybe have it fail as well or anything like that. I'm wanting to minimize things, but that just goes through and throws me. And okay, I've got a blown power supply now, and I have to go through and address that. And so it kind of dampens and goes through and takes a video in a different direction. You're expecting to have a working machine, and then all bets are off. I came into this from watching that previous video, and I want to clearly state that that was very helpful for what I knew I had to have. I knew I had to have an angled of that C13 power cable to plug in. That I couldn't go through with the straight on power cord would have been harder to go through in the range. So I had all the other things, and even the system set aside that I said I can just swap the planer in there. But that's going to be a more involved step. And I learned all that. I learned what planer was in there from that earlier video that 8-Bit Guy did. I learned a lot of the steps, what I had to have around the spares for the insides of this. So this topic is not done. I'll go through and I'll have, I'm certain I'll have a working executive workstation, because I'll go through and I'll swap planers, and then I can go through and see how this little monitor works, what image it will or will not show, but everything else works with it on the unit. As I've tested so far, we'll see if we have a working diskette drive and can boot to that diskette drive, and then I'll look at what do I do from there. Do I go through and put on a hard drive on there? And certainly I've got a few of those around. The proprietary models are a little bit dated and probably would fail, or to go the route like my Model 30 that I have, that I went through and put a SCSI hard drive on it. And I know 8-Bit Guy went through and he tried the XT IDE adapter and didn't get that to work. So that's even a viable option for these machines, to go through and for me to get some sort of permanent storage rather than the diskette drive. And as we saw on video, these things are, especially for being a little bit more than the width of the planer that we have on screen there, that we see just how narrow these things are. I didn't realize it was so small. I thought it was a bigger assembly, and I'm just not as familiar, I guess, with 8-Bit Guy's bench that he had before in that studio that he's using at that time. But these things are tiny, pretty compact units. That things are that planer is just underneath that tray. That whole tray has to be undone and pulled off to get at the planer, especially even where the CPU is at all. You weren't going to go through and add anything like the 8087 math coprocessor or anything like that. But so if you thought that this video, well over an hour, was informative, go ahead and click on that like button, and we'll see this unit operating, and we'll see who else got these units and has them operating as well. There may be a chance I'll start being asked, how many spare Model 30 planers do you have? So they can, so these other units can work if they're showing the same fault too. But it does explain a lot to the background of these machines. So I've got 1,000 subscribers. I announced at the start of the video I want to go higher. And so subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already, and recommend it to your friends that might be interested in this sort of content themselves. I can always use even more subscribers than 1,000. But that's all I have for now. This is IBM Museum. Thank you.